I live in Brisbane, so I've got some questions about flight noise around the Brisbane Airport and Greater Brisbane, and I'm asking them on behalf of the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance, who I'm no doubt sure you're very familiar with their advocacy. So first of all, some questions in relation to the Senate inquiry into aircraft noise 2024 recommendations. What is the status of the department's implementation of each of the 21 recommendations from the Senate inquiry?
Senator, the government is yet to respond to the inquiry.
Yes, so what is the status?
Well, Ms Natty might have more, but essentially we are in the process of providing advice to government in response to the inquiry. There are, of course, a number of recommendations which reflect initiatives that have already been undertaken by government, but the response is in development.
Yeah. When was it due?
Senator, indicatively, a response is normally due back within 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so when was that?
The 3-month mark would be later this week, and it's indicative only. It isn't a hard deadline.
No, I'm not so sure it's an indicative deadline, but that's not the substance of my question. But I think the community would be very disappointed if the deadline was not adhered to. So is there an intention to have it completed by that deadline, the end of the week?
The government's response is currently being drafted, Senator.
Yes, and so when are you anticipating having it finished?
I haven't got a date yet, Senator.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not seeking to meet the 3-month time frame?
Can I just ask a follow-up?
No, I've got the call.
We are doing our best to do the drafting in consultation with a number of other agencies who are also named in those recommendations.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
We're doing our best to coordinate the government's response, noting that we have to coordinate with a number of other agencies who are also noted in those recommendations. Okay. So it isn't only the department responding, the department is coordinating a response for government.
Okay. And those others also know about the 3-month time frame.
If I may, I've been advised that we will be responding as soon as possible. So,
do you have any sense
what
of
I've been
what
advised.
that means,
yes,
Minister?
That's about as far as I can go
soon
at this point in time,
Okay.
Senator Waters.
All right. Well, it is being watched very closely, so please respond as soon as possible, ideally within the time frame. Have you initiated research into the health impacts of aircraft noise exposure on human health, including sleep disruption and associated economic costs, as recommended in Recommendation 2 of the inquiry report? Has that one commenced?
Just having a look at Recommendation 2.
Research into the health impacts of aircraft noise exposure on human health, including sleep disruption and associated economic costs.
Senator, is your question, has the department initiated any of those actions?
Yes. Have you started the research?
No, the department has not commenced anything of that nature.
And are you going to?
So as my colleague Mr Wood has said, we will be responding on behalf of the government to each of the recommendations in turn.
Okay. How are you ensuring that the continuous descent and climb operations become the standard at major airports as outlined in Recommendation 5?
I might just pass to my colleague Mr Small.
Thank you. Scott Small, Acting Assistant Secretary of Airports Branch. The Recommendation 5 is under consideration, and we are working with Air Services and CASA on responses to provide advice to government on that. It'll be a decision for government if they accept that recommendation or how they respond to that.
Okay. And what time frame are you working to give that advice to government?
Senator, as Ms Natty said, we are working as fast as possible to provide that advice.
Right. Okay. Has the department mandated yet that nighttime aircraft operations at Brisbane Airport comply with ICAO Chapter 14 Balanced Approach Noise Management Rules, which is in Recommendation 6?
Yeah. Senator, the balanced approach to aircraft noise recommended by ICAO is a series of measures that effectively recommends that the first way of treating noise is at the source, so aircraft design, aircraft engines, those sorts of things. It runs through a number of other opportunities to address aircraft noise, land use planning, operational measures, and as a last resort operational restrictions. I think Australia's approach to aircraft noise has effectively been consistent with that approach for many years. So, for example, Chapter 2 aircraft, the effectively noisiest and older aircraft are no longer allowed to operate in Australia.
Okay, and nighttime aircraft operations in particular, has that been mandated?
Well, I think, and others may have more, but
I'm sorry, could you speak up for me a little, or perhaps stand so?
Of course, Senator.
Thank you.
I think the point that I'm making is that the approach to aircraft noise in Australia is consistent with the ICAO balanced approach to noise. We take into account all of those types of mitigations for aircraft noise, be it restrictions on aircraft types, which is something that is done through ICAO, through noise and through aircraft noise standards, albeit through land use planning restrictions.
Okay, so it is mandated, or it's not mandated, but you do it anyway?
Well, I think different aspects of it are mandated. Again, aircraft noise standards are mandated and have been for many years through the aircraft noise, air navigation aircraft noise regulations. So the recommendation, I'm not sure there is a specific element of that recommendation to mandate. It's an approach, a set of principles. It's
Recommendation 6, which suggests that the department mandates nighttime aircraft operations at Brisbane Airport comply with ICAO Chapter 14 balanced approach noise management rules.
Yes, Senator, that's the recommendation, but the balanced approach is essentially a set of principles, and there are a set of principles that are effectively already in place through various noise approaches in Australia.
Okay. I think the community lacks confidence that they're being complied with, hence the suggestion for them to be mandated. So that was why I'm asking you whether they're mandated, but I think you're saying no.
Well, I think they're being mandated in a range of different ways. I mean, the ICAO balanced approach does not specifically mandate a type of regulatory approach for specific airports. It's a set of guidance on the types of mitigations that can be put in place to respond to aircraft noise.
Okay. Can I move now quickly to the aviation white paper? What's the current status of the implementation of the noise-related recommendations in that 2024 aviation white paper?
Senator, just being joined by my colleague Mr Vincent. There are a number of actions or initiatives that were in the white paper. While Mr Vincent finds his notes, I will start with Initiative 33. Need some glasses. So Initiative 33 is to improve transparency about aircraft noise impacts. And there are several things that are underway. There's the Minister's Statement of Expectations to Air Services Australia under the Air Services Act of 1995 outlines the government's expectations. Air Services, and you may want to speak with them later as well, Air Services are working to include additional information, and the department understands that additional information regarding Brisbane in particular has been included, and that they will publish a quarterly report on that.
Okay, thank you. I do have a series of questions for Air Services later on tonight. I think there's more than just Initiative 33, though, is there not?
Yes, there is. I'll just hand to Mr Vincent to continue, Senator.
Ben Vincent, Assistant Secretary, Domestic Policy and Programs Branch. As you're aware, Senator, the Aviation White Paper included a number of initiatives intended to enable a balanced approach to airport planning and noise. Work is underway on all of those. As Ms Natty just mentioned, Air Services Australia is progressing a range of initiatives around the appointment of an executive for noise and environment, around enhancements to the noise and flight path monitoring system, around best practice consultation in accordance with the community engagement standard. Beyond that, there are initiatives around developing guidance on flying considerately for aircraft operating under visual flight flight rules or outside of controlled airspace to minimise noise impacts. Work is on foot on that. There is scoping work underway around updates to guidelines for community aviation consultation groups. There's a fair bit of activity on foot.
Okay, thank you. So there's a bit underway. Are there any that have been completed?
Let me check, Senator. Sorry, wrong part of my brief. I think, actually, let me just check and I'll confirm. Okay. I believe that in terms of Initiative 37, improve engagement with communities affected by changes to airspace and flight paths, that one is complete. Air Services Australia is applying the community engagement standard in consultation processes. I believe that, and Air Services will be better placed to discuss this a bit later, but I do believe that an executive has now been appointed for noise and environment too.
Okay, thanks. I'll take both of those up with Air Services later on. Will the department consider introducing legally binding noise thresholds for airports across Australia?
I think that would be a matter for government, Senator.
Okay, are you doing any policy work to examine what that might look like and entail?
I'm very much focused in my area, Senator, on delivery of the initiatives outlined in the white paper.
Okay. So is anyone doing any work on considering legally binding noise thresholds for airports? No. Okay.
No, Senator.
What support and compensation will be given to communities affected by noise exposure if airports fail to meet noise abatement targets?
That's not something that we're currently considering, Senator.
Are you assuming that they will meet those targets and therefore you don't need to think about compensation and support for what happens when they don't?
I think your question, Senator, assumes that there is legally binding noise targets, and I don't believe that to be current policy or in the legislative framework.
Okay.
But to go to that issue, one of those initiatives around enhancing the noise and flight path monitoring system will see more public reporting on non-compliance with noise abatement procedures at major airports.
Okay, thank you.
So your
and what?
will be confirmed with public.
That's right. So you'll be validated on a website. That's great. What progress has been made, if any, in working with the National Airports Safeguarding Advisory Group to update the National Airports Safeguarding Framework by 2027?
So, Senator, are you referring, I just want to check that I'm on the right page with you, Initiative 36 relating to improving land use planning outcomes near airports?
If that's the one that's about working with National Airports Safeguarding Advisory Group to update the National Airports Safeguarding Framework, then yes.
Yes. So there is a review of the safeguarding framework through the period 2025 to 2027. There are under development education materials for local planning officials this year in 2025. And then the third part of that relates to updating the Australian Standard on Building, Siting and Construction in relation to aircraft noise intrusion, also known as or related to AS 2021-2015, the acoustics aircraft noise intrusion through Standards Australia. And any review of that standard is a matter for Standards Australia.
Okay, thank you. Just moving quickly to the health impacts of aircraft usage, and again, staying in Brisbane, Acacia Ridge State School is right next to Archfield Airport in Brisbane. Given the known environmental hazards of leaded aviation fuel, especially on young children, what steps has the department taken to ensure compliance with soil and air pollution standards around airports used by lead-based avgas planes?
think what we would suggest is that where there are known environmental impacts, that when they're, and it would depend what they are and who would deal with them in the Commonwealth Government. So some of the impacts that you're suggesting, Senator, such as lead, may or may not be related to aviation gas. And there would need to be some testing and validation of that data before such time as it was presented to the government for any future action.
Okay, sorry, you're saying leaded aviation fuel isn't problematic?
I'm saying it's only one of the things that might contribute to having lead in a water supply.
Yes, okay, but are you looking at what bit you are in charge of and ensuring that your soil testing and so forth? Is that you? Who does that?
Yes, so there is a program to test for PFAS contamination at 37 airports across the country, where there is reason to believe that PFAS contaminants exist as a result of the Commonwealth Government having interest in those sites in the past.
Yes. Do you test for anything else?
At this stage, we're not testing for anything else, Senator.
Okay. Who is responsible for enforcing environmental protections under the Airports Act and the Airports Environmental Protection Regs?
Senator, we are on the airport site, and effectively the limits of the Airports Act are largely for the airport site, but I think my colleagues will be able to answer in more detail. Just going back to the previous line of questioning around avgas, fuel standards or fuel quality issues are actually the responsibility of other agencies. I think it's, I'm not sure if it's Department of Climate Change, Environment and Water, or if it's Industry, Science and Resources. It's probably DQ now.
Okay, so the interaction of that responsibility, which, as you rightly say, would normally be the Environment Department, and the fact that you're responsible for airports under the Airports Act and the Environmental Protection Regs, so who would be in charge of ensuring that the airport is complying with soil and air pollution standards? Would that be you, or would that be the Environment Department?
I'll ask Ms Wright to address your question, Senator.
Tori Wright, Assistant Secretary, Airport Environment. Yes, that is something that the department is responsible for.
Your department?
Our department. My branch is essentially the environmental regulator of leased federal airports under the Airports Act and the Airports Environment Protection Regulations.
Yep.
We have a network of regulatory officers that oversee 19 airports under that legislative framework.
Okay, so what steps has you and your 19 people, or perhaps some other organ of the department, taken to ensure compliance with soil and air pollution standards around airports used by lead-based avgas planes?
Senator, that particular issue is not one that has been brought to our regulators' attention at that airport. If there is a need to do testing, the requirements are set out under our regulations for how that would be done, which is in accordance with national standards. So the National Assessment of Contaminated Lands, National Environment Protection Measure, things like that apply. Our regulators would require that of the airport. As the environmental manager, they are the responsible entity under our regulations for making sure that said testing would occur, and that information would feed through to our regulators to make sure that that's being done
and
in accordance.
How could that process be commenced? Could, say, parents of kids at the Acacia Ridge School write to you and ask that happen, given that they're worried about their children?
By all means, that correspondence can come in our direction. If there is a signal that there is a problem, then our regulators would look at the information that might already exist, and if needed, direct the airport to take said action.
Okay, I'm just trying to get at what you would consider a signal that there is a problem to be, so that the community can know what to do to start that process.
Sure, that information can be fed to us through correspondence. So that is one way that a flag can be raised.
Okay.
Another way would be if the airport had, through its routine monitoring and testing of the airport, which it does, if it had identified that there were exceedances of a particular contaminant that's listed under our regulations, then they would identify that through the normal channels to us as well.
Okay. How frequently do those routine tests get done?
For most airports, I think routine soil and surface water and groundwater monitoring is done seasonally, so essentially quarterly. That information is fed through to our regulators.
Okay. Is that published anywhere, the data?
It is usually in the airport environment report that's provided to us as the regulator under the Airports Act requirements. It is not routine for those reports to be made publicly available. That's not a requirement under our legislation, but it is open. The airports are open to publish that themselves.
Okay, but if there was an exceedance, the department would notice and do something, one would hope.
That's correct, Senator.
Okay. Is it correct that each airport is required to maintain the position of Airport Environment Officer, who's responsible for doing that soil and air and water pollution monitoring, ensuring compliance and reporting to the department on the findings of those assessments?
So
each airport has one of them?
Each airport has assigned a regulator, so that's the Airport Environment Officer that is an employee of our department. Okay. And it is a requirement under head lease agreements with the airports that that regulatory oversight is provided by that position.
And what data have those AEOs for both Brisbane Airport and Archerfield Airport reported to the department in the last 24 months?
I don't have that information available at the moment, Senator.
Okay. Could you take on notice, please? And I'd like full copies of all the AEO reports and the data sets, including whether any soil testing was performed and what the results were. Could you provide that on notice, please?
I will see what we have. Yes, Senator. I'm not sure of the level of detail that I can provide to you. There are restrictions under legislation as to what information can be shared by our regulators with other parties. So okay. I'll take that on notice.
Well, I reckon if they want to take on the investigative powers of the Senate, then that's probably a bigger fight than you or I. But they should be aware that when we ask for stuff, we kind of like to be able to see it. Thank you. According to the Australian Petroleum statistics, over 70 million litres of avgas was sold in 2024 in Australia, resulting in the release of over 40 tonnes of lead into the environment, primarily around airports. What actions has the department undertaken to address the release of 40 tonnes of lead into the environment from avgas sales reported just in 2024?
I'm not aware that we have specifically addressed anything relating to the release of avgas, Senator. 40
tonnes of lead, not a concern?
I didn't say it wasn't a concern. I said I didn't think that we had done anything specifically to address that issue, Senator.
Right. Well, if you're concerned, why aren't you doing something?
Senator, I think this goes to the point I made earlier that issues... Sorry, Senator. I think that goes to the issue I mentioned earlier, that issues to do with fuel quality are regulated by other agencies.
Okay. And lastly, how many assessments of soil contamination related to lead emissions have been conducted under Regulation 6.07 of the Airport's Environmental Protection Regs, and what were the findings?
Senator, I'm not aware of testing of that nature having been done at those airports.
Okay, none. All right. And are there any ongoing investigations into breaches of environmental standards concerning lead pollution around any Australian airport?
Not that I'm aware, Senator.
Okay. But you are checking and you're not investigating because you think everything's fine, even though you're not looking at the 40 tonnes of lead? I'm a bit confused.
So lead is a listed contaminant under the Airport Environment Protection Regulations. Yep. The limits of those regulations do not extend to the fuel that we're talking about today.
Oh, so you look at lead, but not if it's come from avgas.
That's correct, Senator.
Who made that silly rule?
I don't know that, Senator.
Right. Okay. How would we go about... Who writes the rules that says you don't... It's just a reg, is it? we might take that up with the
So the Airports Environment Protection Regs 1997 are, as the name suggests, an old piece of legislation.
Yeah.
The schedules attached to those regulations have contaminants listed for air, noise, water and soil.
Yeah.
Lead is listed as a contaminant under those schedules. The scope of what we regulate under those regulations is defined, elsewhere in the regulations, but does not extend to aviation fuels.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that up with the powers that be. Thanks for your help. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Gedzi.
Just before you leave, the Senator Waters' questions on response to the Senate inquiry, and I note the Minister was upholding the authority of the Senate in assuming that timelines are being kept, but it sounds like timelines of the Senate seem quite arbitrary in this section of the department, given that it's due to be tabled to the Senate, the government response, within a week. We haven't even sent a draft of the response up to the Minister for her consideration. Is that the case, Mr Wood?
I would need to confirm if a draft has been sent there. I do.
Well, from what I heard from the officials' evidence was that you're still working on the draft.
Yeah, I think that may be the case, Senator, but I haven't seen that particular document myself. I would observe that it is a complex report with over 20 recommendations and, of course, was delivered just prior to the Christmas period, so part of that 3 months has been taken up through the Christmas period. That said, recognise and obviously take very seriously the obligations to provide a response to government for consideration as soon as possible.
I know you say that, but it doesn't seem like it, because the senators, 3 of them which are here, actually 4 of them are here, who participated on that inquiry, along with the countless number of community organisations across the country who wanted to see a response from the government prior to the election. It seems, Mr Wood, you say it's because everyone went on holidays.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you actually did. You said Christmas.
No, well, Senator, no, the department is shut down for a period through Christmas. I'm not saying that we're on holidays through the whole of December and January, but it was obviously a factor to be able to engage with the right people at the right time. But as I say, the more significant issue is there are 20, sorry, I haven't got the precise number, but over 20 recommendations, some of which are actually quite complex to consider, and I think it's important that we provide the best advice possible to government in the first instance, and then should government accept that advice, to the Senate and the community.
So what is your time frame for providing the draft to the Minister?
I would have to say as soon as possible, Senator. I'm not sure I can give much more than that at this point.
Sounds very hopeful, Minister McCarthy. Do you have confidence that this will get to the Minister in time for her to consider it in an appropriate time frame?
I have confidence in the Minister's ability to pursue this, Senator McKenzie.
Well, the Minister's not the problem in this regard, but yes.
But yes, I know that the Minister will want to respond in an appropriate time to the Senate.
Can I just ask, is a cabinet submission being prepared?
Senator, that whether this report would need to go to Cabinet is, I think, would need to be a matter for the Minister to consider. Typically, for a government response, it would need to be shared with, I believe, the Prime Minister, and to the extent there are other ministers involved in a response. Many of the recommendations here fall within this portfolio, so whether a Cabinet approach is something that would still need to be considered.
So, at this stage, no decision has been taken to go to Cabinet on this response?
To the best of my knowledge, Senator, but I'd need to confirm with others as to whether...
Given the Prime Minister's interest in this sort of stuff, I'd be surprised if it didn't. But no submission's being prepared right now.
We're working to finalise a response to the...
And just
to
quickly,
the
Senator
response,
McKenzie, just very quickly, just in, again, following up Senator Waters' questions, that recommendation, I think it was recommendation 5 about the ICAO, Chapter 14, the text of the report makes clear that it is about particular aircraft types, and the view here is particularly the A380 at 2 a.m. or whatever from Brisbane is on the threshold of meeting that requirement. It should be looked at closely about whether it's appropriate to be flying over while people are sleeping at night.
It would seem from the timeframes outlined to the committee today that it is highly unlikely that this will be dealt with prior to the election, which is incredibly disappointing for the people that took the time out to give us the evidence that they did through this inquiry. I have questions